Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another ECOS Lineman Safety National Webinar. Again, it's a beautiful morning here in August in South Carolina. We got Mr. Matt Edmonds here with us today from SET Solutions. Appreciate you being here, brother.
Absolutely.
And Mr. Matt, he's got a good one for you today. It's, does anyone have any questions? Do you? And this is a topic that is needed in our industry. This is a topic that we haven't had on ECOS yet to date. Feel free to email me, safetytraining@beermeters.com, and I'll be glad to send you, you got to use your company email address, and I'll be glad to send you all the episodes. I believe this is 52, is it not? 52? Episode 52.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah, I think 52. So we're over halfway to 100, all right? But anyways, ECOS, we started about 2.5 years ago. And again, I was talking to Mr. Matt here and showing him that this is a grassroots coalition, a partnership. And it's folks like Matt and SET Solutions, the company SET Solutions he's works with, that are just giving back. We're just giving back to the industry. So you guys get to have all the topics, learn from everybody's expertise and experience at no cost. You can't make this up. But Mr. Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
So Matt Edmonds. I live in a little town called Lexington, South Carolina. That's where SET Solutions is based out of. I've got an amazing wife.
Yeah.
Almost married 20 years.
Yeah.
Coming up. 2 awesome kids. My son's moving to college in just a couple weeks, and my daughter is in 10th grade. I'm passionate about safety. I'm passionate about trying to help people, and that's really what I try to do. I've been doing this now for 19 years. Like I said, I enjoy what I do. I enjoy talking to people. I really just enjoy seeing how people do what they do, and is there a way that I can help them?
Yeah.
I'm a safety consultant, and a lot of folks have this idea of maybe what a safety consultant is, but at the end of the day, it's just trying to help people.
Yeah.
We're all trying to get better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I met Matt Edmonds a couple of years ago at an incident prevention, the utility safety professional conference, and anyways, about a year ago, I sat in on he had a keynote, and basically he compared what it's like to share being on the stage and versus sitting in the chair receiving, and the pros and cons of both sides. And it was an amazing, I wish we had that on video. It was an amazing presentation as a keynote. And that's where I started really liking what Matt has to offer, because you could see that passion, and you'll see that today as well. So Matt, tell us a little bit about SET Solutions.
Yeah, so SET Solutions started in 2000 by the amazing Pam Tompkins.
Mm-hmm.
Been in the utility industry for, she's not going to want me to say how long, but it's been some years.
Yeah.
So we are a full-service safety consulting company. Our bread and butter, so to speak, is the electric power industry. We work with some other folks that are out there, but the vast majority of our clients is electric power industry. Focused on safety, and like I said earlier, just helping people get better. We come in, we do assessments, we do training, we do program development, all of that sort of stuff. But we're the type of folks who want to work with the utility, work with the people there. We don't want to just come in and do all the work for you, because at the end of the day, it's yours, right? From an organizational standpoint, it's yours, and if we do all the work, then it's not yours anymore. So we want folks to own that, and we want to help people get to that point.
That's awesome. Yeah, so Matt was saying about Miss Pam Tompkins as far as being in the industry for a long time. Here's a little side note of interest, possibly, that Walter Beer, my stepdad, the owner of Beer Meters, here, we're actually at our Live Line Training Center here in South Carolina today. He used to work with Pam Tompkins. What the heck? Years and years ago, my stepdad, my dad, he was vice president of loss control and safety and loss control, and Pam Tompkins and him would run cross paths all the time working with the Electric Cooperative of South Carolina. So there you go. Can you believe it? Full circle. Anyways, I hope you all enjoy. I know I'm looking forward to Mr. Matt's presentation. Been looking forward for it for a long time. So here we go. All right?
Fantastic.
Matt,
Awesome.
have
Thanks,
fun,
Brett.
man.
Man, I'm looking forward to it. Well, hello everybody. I've been looking forward to this for a while now, and really where I want to go with this is we're going to end this with a challenge. This is a big challenge for all of us, for you and for me, to make sure that we are encouraging people to speak up, but also that we're speaking up. So this is both sides of it. This is if you're someone who has a leadership role, you want to encourage people to speak up. If you're someone who's not a leader, you are the person that needs to still be speaking up. This applies to every single one of us that are out there. Now, when I get into this, I like to start bringing this idea of culture up, because I think this does a good job of setting the stage for where we go from here and really why this is important. You know, there's this thing called culture, and it's a great buzzword. Everybody talks about culture and culture this and culture that. But I think it's important for us to really just have a good handle, like, well, so what is this thing that's called culture? Who drives culture? Who creates culture? All of those things that go along with that. And so there is a really clear definition of what culture is, and that's what you're seeing right here. It says values, belief systems, attitudes, set of assumptions that people in a workplace share. So specifically, we're talking about a workplace culture. Break down those words: values, belief systems, attitudes, and assumptions. You and me, every single one of us, we have those. Every single day, we have those. And the environment in which we work kind of shapes and molds what those things are. And a lot of folks will talk about, well, culture's created up here at the top and it's kind of pushed down. And that's kind of true, but it's not 100% true. You know, if I'm a part of an organization, I am someone who gets a say in how the culture goes. If you're a part of an organization, you're someone who gets a say in how that culture goes. Whether it's going to be a good culture, a positive culture, or maybe not such a great culture. And so just kind of take that to heart. And I have a really good analogy. This was not my idea. I was at a conference one time and somebody said this and I was like, ooh, that is a really, really good idea. And it goes to gardening. Now, I don't know if you garden or not. My granddad always had this really amazing garden growing up. But I'm going to have a couple pictures that I like to put up here on the screen, right? And if you look at that picture over there on your left versus the one on the right, there's a difference, right? There's a pretty significant difference in what you're looking at here on this screen. So my question that I always like to ask here is, which one of these looks better? And I don't think it's going to be really shocking that most people are going to say it's the one on the left that looks better, right? The one on the right, everything looks dead. Everything on the left looks alive. Now, here's the next question that I like to ask when you look at these two pictures. Which one of these do you think takes more work? Is it the one on the left or is it the one on the right? And again, I don't think it's going to be real shocking that, well, the one on the right doesn't take any work at all. Like, it is what it is. The one on the left is going to require a lot of work. And if you're someone who's had a garden, you understand that. You know that. You got to get out there. You're constantly pulling weeds, trying to keep the bugs out. All the things that goes along with that. And so as we move through this and we think about this, this idea of really building a good culture requires a lot of work. And it doesn't happen by accident. I always like asking simple questions and going into my gardening theme. I promise this is not a trick question, all right? So if you had a garden and in your garden you planted tomato plants, what do you think you might get? Yeah, all right, tomato plants. Hopefully you said tomato plants, all right. If you had a garden and you planted cucumbers, you're probably gonna get cucumbers out of that, right? And we can go down, we can name all these fruits, we can name all these vegetables and all of those things. But here's the question. If you have a garden and you don't plant anything, what do you get? You don't get nothing. You get weeds. Weeds will take over. Weeds will thrive in that type of environment. And when you really think about this culture thing with this analogy of a garden, if we don't put in the work to make sure that we have a good, positive culture, we're going to have a bad one. You know, I'm fortunate, like Brent was talking about earlier, I'm fortunate I get to travel around, I get to see a lot of different organizations, I get to go in, I get to talk to people from, say, like CEOs, vice presidents, all the way to the folks that are out in the field. Have conversations with them. And I ask questions like, hey, tell me about what safety is. Tell me what you think about this when it comes to safety. And I have never, ever, ever walked in the door, had a conversation with any of those folks, and they said, Matt, our goal here at this company, the thing that we really hope is we have a really crappy culture. I've never heard that. I've never heard those words. Where they say, hey, we really want people to be miserable. We want people to hate their job and hate coming to work every day. That's what we strive for. No one's ever said those words to me. But at the same time, I've unfortunately walked in the door at some places, and that was the environment that was there. That was the culture that was there. And so I just encourage you to think about it from this perspective up here. If we want to have that good culture, it takes a lot of work to get there. It's not to set it on cruise control. It takes a lot of work to get there. And so that sets us up for where we go from here, kind of talking about this idea of speaking up and asking questions. Because if we have a good culture, we're going to have people speaking up. We're going to have people asking questions. If we don't, we're going to have this. If we're not encouraging people, we're going to have this. So just kind of take that to heart. And again, this is something that every single one of us, you and me, have the ability to do. It's not necessarily what someone else needs to do either. I think this is a really, really good takeaway from this. And you and me, just as people, a lot of times it's real easy for us to look at something and say, ooh, so-and-so needs to hear that, or so-and-so needs to do that, or I wish they did this. But ultimately, it's about you and it's about me and what can we do. So I encourage you, please listen to this and think about, well, what can I do? What can you do to make this environment better and to improve the culture a little bit, all right? So let's get into this idea of speaking up. And I like to ask a lot of questions. I said that earlier in the intro. And so one of my questions is like, well, why do we think workers should speak up? Do we think workers should speak up? Or should they just keep their mouth shut and we just tell them what to do? I think most of us are probably going to say, hey, we want people to speak up. We want folks talking about things, but really, what's the why? And so my goal here is to talk about, well, why do we want workers to speak up? What stops workers from speaking up? And what are some practical things that we can do to encourage people to speak up for you and for me? So why do we want them to speak up? Well, hey, first and foremost, we don't know everything. Everybody doesn't know everything. And so if I don't know something, a lot of times the best way for me to figure out is to ask a question. Hey, can you tell me about this? I don't really understand that. I don't know what we're doing today. We want folks to speak up if they don't know something and ask those questions. Here's another really big one, especially when it comes to this idea of safety, y'all, because we want people talking about, hey, I see this, I see that. Because we are all different people, we may see things just a little bit differently. And because we may see things a little bit differently, I may see something that somebody else doesn't see, and they may see something that I'm just completely oblivious to. And this is especially true for those of us and for those of you that have done a job over and over and over and over and over again. Here's what happens to us. We just don't see things that are right there in front of us, because we haven't seen them before. And so we get so much in the groove that we get into this thing and we don't even see the stuff that could be happening right there in front of us. Inattention blindness, selective attention, all of those things that go along with that. So we want folks speaking up and talking about, hey, I see this. Have we identified that? Have we addressed that? And here's the deal. If we get people doing these things, it encourages other people to speak up. It's not all about one person doing all the talking. We want other people to actually speak up because, hey, if I see Bob over there and Bob had a question and his question got answered, next time I have a question, I'm probably going to feel like I can speak up and ask another question. So it's really going to encourage people to speak up. Now, here's the big takeaway from all of this. Speaking up is a part of communication. Later on in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about what effective communication is. But teams that effectively communicate are safer teams. Teams that don't talk to each other are not. And again, sometimes what happens to you and me, especially when we get real comfortable working with the people that we work with from day to day to day, we think we don't need to say anything. because we can anticipate what they're going to do. I know what they're thinking before they know what they're thinking, or at least we think we do. We've got to be able to communicate, because when we communicate, you and me, we can all be a safer team, because ultimately, especially in a working environment, one of the main goals is to be able to go home at the end of the day, right? To go home at the end of the day, but again, that takes work. We got to put forth an effort, and we got to make a conscious decision to make sure that happens, and hopefully that's not happening by luck. So one of the things that we can do to make sure that happens is communicate clearly with each other. So that's why we want folks to speak up, but why don't people speak up? I mean, if all this is great, this all sounds good, Matt, you know, people need to speak up. I just don't understand why they don't speak up anymore. So let's talk a little bit about that. Because I guarantee you there's been some times in life where you've wanted to say something and you didn't. You felt like you should speak up and you didn't. Because I know it's happened to me, where you get this little voice in your head. So what stops us? Here's what stops us. This isn't the only thing, but this is one of those big things, and I think it's important that we really address this thing. And why don't people speak up? It's because we're scared. And I know it's hard for some of us to say, like, I'm not scared of anything. I'm not scared. But it goes back to this thing that we call fear. And here's what fear is when we break it down, and we're going to put some technical terms on it. But fear is this thing called absence of what we call psychological safety. And I said psychological safety, and some folks may have immediately said, oh boy, where are we going with this thing? All right, I promise this is going to be really, really good and really, really useful. This term psychological safety is an important one that I think gets overlooked and people don't address way too often, maybe because we're scared of it, if I'm being real honest. This thing called psychological safety is a real thing, whether we want to acknowledge it's really there or it's not really there. And so what I want to do, I want to spend just a minute or two and let's talk about, well, what is this thing called psychological safety? If we're going to say that it's not there, if we're going to say that it doesn't exist, what is it? Well, I underlined a word up here on this slide. It says feeling. And some folks are like, oh boy, we got psychological safety, and now we're going to talk about feelings. All right, so, hey, here's the reality of the situation. You and me have feelings every single day, all the time. You're feeling something right now. We have feelings about things all the time. And so when we say words like feelings and we say them out loud, we get this almost negative connotation sometimes on where we go with this word called feeling. But if we don't feel safe to do something, we might not do it. And odds are we probably won't do it. And so this idea called psychological safety is all about feeling safe to do some things. I'm in an environment, I'm in a culture where I feel like I can do this. And this first little thing up here says take interpersonal risk. Here's what that means. I'm willing to look like an idiot. I'm willing to look ignorant. I'm willing to speak up and say, I don't understand and I don't know. When in reality, I should maybe know, or everybody has this assumption that I know. We learn this very, very early on. If you've ever been in elementary school, middle school, high school, anything like that, we figure out real quick, don't look dumb. You just keep your mouth shut. Don't ask questions, because it's happened to us at some point in time. We asked the question and everybody laughed at us. And so feeling safe, we've got to get to a point where we're not worried about somebody laughing at us or making fun of us because I want to speak up and I want to say something. So that's the first part of psychological safety, all right? And this one right here, this third thing that you see up on the screen, to disagree openly. Well, that's a good one. Remember I said earlier, like, this session is not just for leaders. This session's for leaders and this session's for everybody else that's out there. And guess what? Everybody doesn't always agree on stuff. And we really want to get to a place where it's okay to disagree. I know the world that we live in right now, a lot of times we look at this idea of disagreement and it's almost to the point where it's like, if I disagree with you, I hate you, which isn't the case. We're all different people. We all see things differently. And it's okay to disagree. Hey, especially when going back to that hazard recognition and hazard control and all of that, I'm hoping that somebody will speak up and say something. If I say we're going to do something a certain way and maybe there's a better way to do it and you've got an idea, speak up. We can disagree about stuff. Let's have a conversation about it, right? And it all goes down to this last thing that you see up here. I can talk about this stuff. I can talk about my concerns without feeling like there's going to be consequences. Without feeling like I'm getting, labeled as the person, well, they're just a troublemaker and they want to cause problems all the time. But it all goes back to this thing called psychological safety. We want folks to really speak up because we've already talked about why the benefits are. So psychological safety, that's a big part of it. What are some of the other just practical things why we don't speak up? And I think these are some of the things that most of us can probably identify with. Most of us have probably seen at some point in the past. And the first thing that I have up here says, I don't need to speak up because they know what they're doing. You ever looked at anybody and seen what they were doing and thought, something doesn't look right there. That something just does not look right. Believe it or not, my wife has told me that before. I'm in the middle of doing something. She's like, that doesn't look very good to me. So we won't speak up because we assume, there's a word, assumptions that we talked about in culture a little bit ago. We assume somebody knows what they're doing and they know how to do it, especially if they've been doing it for a long time. Y'all, here's what I'll tell you, and this is unfortunately true. I've had to investigate some bad things that have happened in electric power world, in the utility industry. I've looked at fatalities and loss of limbs and burns and all of those things. Here's what I can tell you. The folks that were involved in those incidents typically were not someone who did not know what they were doing. They were someone who had been doing that type of work for a long time. And so we don't want to get to the point where we just assume somebody knows what they're doing. If you get that little voice in the back of your head that says, hey, I should probably say something, there's a reason why that voice is there. Don't ignore it. Say something, speak up. Because it moves into this second thing that you see up here. It says, I chose to look the other way. And if we're being real honest, I think every single one of us have to say, that's happened to me at some point in time. I've seen something that didn't look right. I've seen something, but I was like, you know what? I'm scared to say something. That fear, that psychological safety thing comes back in here and we don't speak up. So I just look the other way. I'd rather not see it. I'll just turn away from it. I'd rather not. Here's another reason why sometimes people don't speak up. They don't care. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. Like, I might not speak up. I might not say anything because I really don't care. And maybe if you're someone that's talking to me, I think what you're saying is really dumb and stupid. So I couldn't care less about what it is. So I don't need to speak up. I really don't need to say anything. But this last one's really, really important and really, really special, especially for those of us that are in a leadership role. People have spoken up and nothing happened. People said something. People brought stuff up. Nothing happened. I said, hey, this doesn't look good. You think we can do something about that? Nothing happened. Which is why I love this quote that you see up here on the screen by Andy Stanley that says, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And just think about that for a second. If you're someone who's in a leadership role, and that whether that's supervisor, manager, foreman, whatever it is, if you're someone who's in a supervisor role and no one's ever bringing you any problems, I firmly believe it's not because they don't have problems. It's most likely because they've lost all the confidence in the ability to fix those problems. Because I said something and nothing happened. I said something and nothing happened. So please, please, please take that to heart. You know, we talk about we want people to speak up. We're going to talk about it in a little bit, but when they speak up, are we listening? Are we listening to what they're saying when they're actually speaking up? So these are all real practical things and why people actually don't speak up. So how do we get to the point where we get people to speak up? This is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. We talked about, why do we want people to speak up and why don't they speak up? But how do we get people to speak up? Well, I'm a pretty practical guy. I'm a pretty simple guy. So I always say, hey, let's keep it simple. We don't need this huge formula. We don't need this magical thing to put out there, this huge program to get people to speak up. You know what? Just ask. Especially if you're someone who's in a leadership role, talk to your folks and say, do you feel comfortable speaking up? Do you feel like you're in an environment where you can speak up and you don't have the fear of all the things that's going to happen? And keep in mind, the fear of what's going to happen might not necessarily come just from the leader. The fear of what might happen to them might come from the co-workers that are there, because that's one of the challenges that I see from time to time as well, right? Well, I don't want to speak up. It's not because my boss is going to get on me, but I don't want to speak up because all these people are going to call me an idiot. And I'm going to hear it for the rest of the day. And in fact, when you really think about it, a lot of folks' nicknames that they have picked up have come from moments like that. So we want folks to really, really, really speak up. So we've got to encourage it, and we got to say, hey, do you feel comfortable speaking up? If you don't, why not? And in reality, praise people when they speak up. So here's a fun little experiment that I did one time. So I gave a presentation similar to this at a conference. And what I did is I took my shirt and I turned it inside out. It was clearly inside out. I had a logo on my shirt, like it was facing on inside out. And I got through almost the entire presentation before someone said, why is your shirt inside out? And I could tell, I looked at people's faces in the audience and they were looking at me like, something's not right, something's not right, his shirt's not right. But I went through almost an entire presentation before somebody was willing to speak up. We don't want that. We want somebody on the front end to say, hey, something's not right. So when somebody does speak up and somebody does say something, this one right here is an important one. We want to praise people and say, you did a really good job. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So we got to engage people. It does not have to be complicated. We just ask pretty simple questions. And where do we go from here? So how do we get to the point where we have people speaking up? I said this a little bit earlier, but I said, teams that effectively communicate will be safer teams. But I did underline and highlight the word effectively communicate. You see, here's the challenge that you and me have just as people. We do a lot of communicating. We don't necessarily do a lot of effective communicating. Because we feel like if I said something, if I sent you an email, if I sent you a text message, you got it. You should understand and you should know exactly what I'm talking about. When in reality, I think every single one of us have been in a situation where somebody told us something, somebody sent us an email or a text message, and well, it didn't work out quite as well because we had questions. And we're like, I don't really understand exactly what you're talking about. And so this idea of mutual understanding is a really important one. I love the graphic that you see up here on this screen because it really does paint a picture of what I'm talking about. Because if you look over there on the left side of this graphic, you may have seen this before. We got a person or an individual, and they got a message, right? They got a message they need to send over here to another person or another group of individuals that's here. But it's not that simple, because there's some things that really get in the way of that message being received as it's intended. And I'm not going to go through all the things that are up here, but when you really get down to it, the challenge for most of these messages is this thing right here that I call filters. And where that comes from is assumptions. And you and me have them. We have assumptions all the time. We make assumptions on this based on what we've seen in the past. And we assume, just as people, that if something makes sense to me, it should make perfect sense to you. And I don't understand how it couldn't make sense, especially if you're someone who's been doing this for a while. And so we throw all these assumptions out there, but the challenge here is when I get information from someone, when you get information from someone, it's got to pass through these filters for me to actually decipher what is the message that's being received. This is probably why You have told someone to do something at some point in time. They go out and do something, and it's nowhere near what you expected. Because they heard something you didn't say. I don't know if any of you are married. That happens. My wife will say things that I didn't hear exactly what you said, all right? And vice versa. So, and it goes back to, because we're people, right? You said this, I heard that. And we decipher things very, very differently. And it all goes back to what are our experiences, what knowledge do we have, all of those types of things. And so we want folks to speak up. I'm going to tell you a story that really involves this, and it really paints a real good picture of this effective communication. And really where both sides should have spoke up a little bit. And so this was a substation contractor. I was teaching a class one time, and they said, Matt, we got a perfect example for you. Substation contractor, and what they do is they go in and they rebuild transformers and substations. And they had an engineer that wanted to go out in the field with them. They hadn't ever done any field work. The engineer had never really seen exactly what they do, so they wanted to get some firsthand experience on how these guys go out and they work in the field and they do their work. And so the guys in the field gave the engineer what seemed like a fairly simple task. They gave them some steel plates and a drill, and they said, hey, we need you to put some holes in these steel plates for us. They marked it out where the holes need to be. Got it. All right, I can do that. Well, he'd been gone for a while, so they had to go looking for him. They found him. Well, they found no holes in the steel plates, but burned up drill bit. All right. Now, some of you probably have already formulated in your head how this happened, but how you burn up a bit and don't make holes in plates, the drill was in reverse. Reverse. Now, I just want you to think in your head, do you know that a drill has a forward and a reverse on it? You most likely do, but guess who didn't know that? The fellow with the drill in his hand. Because here's the reality, this is the first time he'd ever had a drill in his hand. And if somebody asks him, hey, you got that? He says, yeah, I got it. Because in all reality, it doesn't look real hard to do, right? You squeeze the trigger and you put holes in things. I see people do it all the time. And it'd be real easy in this scenario and real easy in this situation to call this guy all these names and how dumb can you be and how stupid can you be. But the reality is he's not stupid because he didn't know the drill didn't have a forward and reverse. Because he never used the drill before. And it's those type of assumptions a lot of times that get us into a lot of trouble when we start talking about this communicating and you should know how to do this and how do you not know how to do that. Because what makes sense to me might not necessarily make sense to you. So it's so important that, like I say up here, to ask clarifying questions. So in other words, if I'm the person who's trying to send a message to somebody, here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to say, do you understand? Because inevitably, most people, going back to that whole fear thing that we talked about earlier, most people, if I ask them, do you understand, are going to say, yep, I got it. So I encourage you, don't mistake agreement for understanding, because we're conditioned to get to the point where we shake our heads and say, yep, I got it. Yep, I got it. And then we turn to our buddy and we're like, okay, what are we doing again? So if I'm the person giving the message, I got to make sure that we're on the same page. I got to ask some clarifying questions like, hey, okay, so run me through. What are you going to do again? Where are you going? How are you going to do that? Because those are going to ensure that we're on the same page, but that's also going to encourage people to speak up if they don't know things. Because if all I ever do is say, does anybody have any questions? And then somebody says, yeah, I got a question. Can you go over that again? And then someone says, were you not paying attention when I went over it the first time? You know what that person's not going to do next time? They're not going to ask a question. Because all the things that we just discussed and we talked about a little bit earlier. So I got to ask clarifying questions, but at the same time, it's not just this individual's responsibility to ask the questions. We want this individual to ask the questions. It's both parties ensuring we are on the same page and we've got what I call mutual understanding, because that's what effective communication really is all about. We are on the same page. We know we're on the same page. Because, mentioned it earlier, the ultimate goal is for everybody to be able to go home at the end of the day the same way they came to work. And if we effectively communicate, we have a lot better chance of making sure that that happens. We want people talking. We want people speaking up. Now, when they do speak up, I said this earlier, we got to listen when they speak up. Here's another big challenge to this. You and me, most likely, well, I know me, most likely you too, not a very good listener. People talk all the time. They're saying words. I see their mouth moving. We're not necessarily great listeners. So we've got to really work at being good listeners. That's why it says actively listen. So I tell you what, I got an exercise we're going to do. Now, some of you may have seen this before. You may have done this before. So I got a little listening exercise. So here's what you can do. You can find yourself a piece of paper and something to write with. You don't have to have a piece of paper and something to write with, but it may help you. So today you're a bus driver, all right? And you got 6 routes on this bus route, or 6 stops on this bus route, okay? What I'm going to do is we're going to talk about all the people that are going to get on, they're going to get off the bus, and at the end of that, I'm going to ask you a question. So that's why I was like, you might want to write some of this stuff down to see if you can answer the question or the questions that I'm going to have at the end of this, all right? So 6 stops on the bus route, all right? Stop number 1, you got 3 people that are going to get on the bus. One of them has a red hat on, okay? Stop number 2, 4 people get on, and 1 person gets off the bus. Stop number 3, 2 people get on, 1 person has a bag, and the person with the red hat gets off the bus. Stop number 4, 5 people got on, 2 had bags, and 2 people got off. Stop number 5, it's easy. No one gets on, no one gets off. No one likes that stop, apparently. All right. And we got 1 stop left, stop number 6. 3 people get on, 2 of them were children, and 2 people got off. At stop number 6, 3 people got on, 2 of them were children, and 2 people got off of the bus. Okay. Hopefully you had time to jot down some notes, write down some stuff, all right? And hopefully you're ready for the question. Okay. Here's the question. How old is the bus driver? Now, you may have to think about it for a second. How old is the bus driver? And some of you may be thinking, I don't remember you saying that, Matt. I don't remember you saying that. All right, so I'm going to put him on the spot. Brent, do you know how old the bus driver is? Brent's behind the camera. He doesn't have a clue how old the bus driver is, all right?
I'm using the drill in reverse.
So the bus driver is 43 years old. Do you know how I know that? Your bus driver is probably going to be a different age. The reason is because you're the bus driver. Now, I don't know if you picked up on that when I first started talking about this. You're the bus driver, so however old you are, that's how old that bus driver is going to be. Now, I do that. We have a little bit of fun with that. Some of you may have seen that little exercise before, but I think it's a really, really good demonstration and a really good illustration in how sometimes we just don't pick up on stuff that's being said. And honestly, I kind of set you up because I said pull out a pen, paper, write all of this stuff down. And I knew at the end of it, I was going to ask you a question that didn't have anything to do with all the information that I just gave you. But what we've got to do is we've got to work on this listening thing, and that's why we call it active listening. It's actively listening. See, here's the challenge when it gets to listening, and some of you may have heard something like this before, but us as people, we've kind of been conditioned to do this as well. We don't listen to get information. We listen so we can respond. I don't know if it's ever happened to you. So having a conversation with somebody, you're going back and forth, they're talking about things. And while they're talking, this little light bulb moment goes off in your head. And you immediately think of something you want to tell them based on what they're talking about. Because that's a light bulb moment, right? And it's just up here and it starts flashing in your head. Just like, okay, bulb, okay. I wish you would shut up so I can tell you what I want to tell you. Right? They're still talking, and you hadn't heard a word they've said once that light bulb goes off in their head. Like, we've got to just do a good job of really listening to what people are saying. And here's the deal, it's a skill. I say this all the time. Just like any skill, the only way we get better is to practice, but I got to make a conscious effort to practice. Going back to my garden. Effort means green, growth, thriving garden. No effort, I don't have to listen to you. I'm going to have a dead garden. So that kind of pulls in the last little point that I wanted to bring up and I wanted to talk about, all right? If we do have folks talking to us, and we mentioned this idea of I need to actively listen. If I got people talking to me, if I got people bringing stuff up to me, act on what they say. Do something with it. If somebody brings up some concerns, if somebody brings up some stuff like, hey, why are we doing that way? Act on it. Because if somebody has that question and they felt safe enough to ask the question, we want to reinforce the question by giving a good answer to it. A good answer is not, do it because I said so. Hey, here's also not a good answer. Do it because the rules say you have to. Having conversations with people, encouraging people to actually speak up. Now, here's the challenge sometimes on this last little thing I have up here, act on what they say. Sometimes folks will bring us things and they'll say, hey, can we do this, or can we get that, or can we work on this? And sometimes you might check into it. Let's say that they found this piece of equipment, right? They really like this piece of equipment and it's something brand new and something amazing, and you check into it and it's you know what, we just can't do that right now. Well, here's where sometimes we fall on that. We don't follow back up to let them know, hey, I checked on it, it's just not going to work out right now. But what happens there is, well, they assume, well, I asked them about it, they never checked on it, they don't care. When in reality, we did, we checked on it. So following back up and acting on what people say. And that acting may mean, hey, I'm going to do something with it. We're going to do this. We're going to change something. Or maybe it's, I just need to follow up with you and let you know, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I can't do that right now. Or we can't change that right now. But we will look at doing that at some point in the future. And I mentioned it earlier, this is not complicated stuff, but at the heart of all of these things, this is an important thing. At the heart of all this stuff is people. Because all this stuff's about people. ECOS is all about people. Because if we care about people, we want to do whatever we can to ensure that they get to go home and that they get to come back to work. And going back to that garden that we discussed and we looked at earlier, it takes work. You know what? It's easy to tell somebody to shut up. It's easy to call somebody stupid. And it's easy to assume that they should know something. It's not always easy to follow up and make sure that we're on the same page and make sure that you understand and all of those things that go along with what we're discussing and what we're talking about. So here's my last challenge to you. I said I like to keep things as simple as I can and not just beat that dead horse, so to speak, and keep saying and saying and saying. My challenge is, we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about some practical things that you and that me can actually do. But I challenge you to come up with one, what I call action item, based on what we talked about today in this session. And an action item is not a, hey, I'm glad we talked about this, or that was a really good point that you made. An action item is action. Like, what are you going to do? What's one thing you're going to do? And that one thing you're going to do means maybe I'm going to ask my team, hey, do you guys feel comfortable speaking up and asking questions? And if they say no, not really, I'm going to actually hear what they're saying and do something about that. Maybe the action item is I'm going to do a better job of actively listening when people talk to me. Do really good at keeping my mouth closed and actually opening up those ears. Maybe my action and item is when I communicate with folks, I'm going to ask some of those clarifying questions to make sure that we are on the same page. Because again, it's all about people, and if we care about people, we'll care about this stuff. Because all of these things help us be better people and help us ensure that folks get to go home at the end of the day. Well, I just want to say thank you for lending me your ear for the last few minutes. speaking up, communicating, asking questions is a huge thing, but it doesn't have to be complicated. We just got to be willing to speak up and actually do it. And so I've got to get to a point where I feel safe to speak up. I've got to get to a point where I feel safe to listen to what people have to tell me. So thank y'all. I appreciate you.